We are almost ready. It is 4 o'clock, at least in my clock. Our speakers for today, we have for today the speech is Information Security and the Handling of Personal Data Breaches. It will be a speech with two speakers. Both of them are from PrivacyPerfect. One is Annemarie. Annemarie is Senior Privacy Consultant at PrivacyPerfect, educated as a technical and scientific translator. She changed career path to become a legal counsel in 2006. Soon after, she acquired a specialization in data protection law, and privacy became the core of her practice. Before joining PrivacyPerfect, she worked as a privacy counsel and privacy officer for two Dutch multinational companies, one family-owned and the other listed. Noortje fills the channel manager position at PrivacyPerfect, collaborating with a broad range of privacy experts and professionals, helping an international base of customers optimize their GDPR processes. She has several years of experience in the IT and software as a service industry, and as such, privacy has also been a key aspect of her work. So I will give you the floor to you, and you can start as soon as you want. Okay, thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you, Roberto, for the introduction, kind introduction, I must say, and of course for giving us the opportunity to host this webinar together with you. And of course, also welcome on behalf of myself and Annemarie to everyone who is attending today's webinar. It's good to see that many people joined. That shows the importance of today's topic. There are possibility to ask questions in the chat of GoToMeeting. We most likely will answer those questions at the end of the webinar, depending a bit on the type of question. But Roberto is checking the questions as well.
Sorry. Yeah, that's true. Sorry to interrupt you. It's true what you say. Any questions you can write it in the chat. We will take care. We will read it and pass it at the end of the webinar. Also, it's important to say that this webinar is recorded and will be published in our Vimeo channel, so will be distributed to our attendants, but also to other members. Okay, sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, don't worry. So let's continue talking about the handling of data breaches, and with an extra emphasis on the importance of information security in this respect. I have some slides to introduce ourselves, but Roberto did such a good job that we are actually skipping this slide because you have heard about us. One extra thing I would like to mention is that you heard Roberto say that both Annemarie and myself work for PrivacyPerfect. And for you who haven't heard of PrivacyPerfect yet, PrivacyPerfect is a legal tech company, as we call it. And what we do is we make an online solution that helps companies to comply with the GDPR. In an easy and efficient manner. We are located in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, and we're serving clients all throughout Europe in different sectors, such as banks, healthcare institutions, but also retailers and schools. So quite a big group of clients that we're working with. But for today's webinar, the agenda, we will focus on the handling of data breaches. In our work, in our everyday work, we are talking a lot to clients and potential clients about their questions regarding the GDPR. And a lot of these questions are about data breaches, and they are quite similar for the different organizations. So what I did, gathered a lot of these questions, and I'm going to ask those to Annemarie, and then Annemarie will shine her legal light on these.
Thank you, Noortje. Well, first I would like to put things into perspective. I think that many of the participants of this webinar are information security specialists. Well, I'm not. I'm a legal expert, and it's not so long ago that privacy was considered to be mainly a matter of law and IT security mainly a matter of technology. But now we see more and more that the gap between these two disciplines narrows, and well, we see overlaps arise. A few observations in this respect. In the first place, information security is a legal requirement by its own right. It's a GDPR requirement. But in the words of the Supervisory Authority of the UK, the ICO, information security is important not only because it is in itself a legal requirement, but also because it can support good data governance, and it can help you demonstrate your compliance with other aspects of the GDPR. Think of privacy by design, privacy by default, keeping data confidential, etc. Finally, I would like to mention here that when calculating a penalty for violation of the GDPR, that the supervisory authority will take into account the fact that you have a strong information security program. So this is a mitigating factor.
Yeah, thank you. So that's why it's so important that IT professionals and privacy professionals, legal and IT, work closely together. And although I think by now that importance is quite well established, it might just be a good idea to quickly go through some of the terminology that we will, or mainly you, will be using throughout this webinar to make sure that everybody that is attending is on the same page about certain terms.
Okay, well, personal data is, according to the GDPR, any information that relates to an identified or identifiable living individual. Personal data that has been made anonymous in such a way that the individual is not longer identifiable is not longer considered to be personal data. But for data to be truly anonymized, the anonymization must be irreversible. And I can tell you that is not often the case. Let me give you some examples of personal data. Well, your name, your surname, your home address, your email address, even your business email address is personal data, your ID card number, location data, your IP address, cookie ID, and data about you held by, well, by a hospital or by your doctor, for instance. Also, every now and then, during this webinar, I will refer to the accountability principle. And this principle states that an organization is accountable not only for complying with the GDPR, but also for demonstrating this compliance. So this principle highlights the importance of your, well, let's say your bookkeeping obligation. Then the definition of a controller. A controller is an organization that determines the why and the how of a certain processing operation, the purposes and the means, we say. For instance, if your organization decides to start using a cloud application, let's say Office 365, or your organization wants to use the services of a website hosting company or a telecommunication services provider, then your organization is, in respect of these operations, the controller. On the other hand, the processor is the organization that processes personal data on behalf of and for the purposes of another organization. So in the examples I just mentioned, Microsoft, the provider of telecommunication services, and the website hosting company are considered to be processors. Then I would like to say something about the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board. As you may know, the Article 29 Working Party used to be the advisory body. And it was made up of representatives from data protection authorities of all European member states and the European Data Protection Supervisor and the European Commission. But they have been replaced, as per the introduction of the new privacy law, by the European Data Protection Board, the EDPB.
Okay, thank you for clarifying this. Let's have a quick look at what we're really talking about, some facts and some figures. Well, since the introduction of the GDPR, you read more and more about data breaches in regular news as well. Here we have some examples on the slide. I think everybody recognized the main ones, like the British Airways, who got a fine for not having appropriate security measures in place, or the Marriott Hotel for not correctly doing their due diligence on systems they took over from another other company. One in the Netherlands that was a little bit less tech, but more human error. It was about a celebrity who was admitted in a hospital, and more people than should have had access to her medical records. And of course, the one that is very recent, the vulnerability that was detected in the Citrix systems. And here we actually saw that data breaches can have a deep impact, even a disruption effect on society. Here in the Netherlands, the Car Service Association, if I can call them like this, warned people for the increase of traffic jams because there were more people that couldn't work from home due to this data breach. But as I mentioned before, it is not a concept that has been introduced by the GDPR, obviously, but the awareness and the need to report them grew immensely with the introduction of the GDPR. Here we took a graph that we took from a report that DOI Piper made with an overview of data breaches between January 2019 and January 2020. Here are some of the European countries listed and the amount of data breaches they reported in that period of time. Size of the country is not taken into account in this specific graph. You can see there's a huge difference between the highest and the lowest number. And I don't know if we should be proud or not, Annemarie, but I mean, in the Netherlands, we are quite on the top. And in all fairness, one of the reasons might be that in the Netherlands, we already had the obligation to report data breaches in all different industries from 2016 on. So it might be just that we are a bit used to it. But it will be definitely interesting to see whether or not these numbers get a little bit more evenly spread out throughout the coming years. Another interesting thing to see, and this comes from a report from the Dutch supervisory authorities, is if we're talking about data breaches, what type of data breaches are we talking about? Today is focusing on information security, but as we see here, 63% in this research, a data breach was caused by a wrong recipient. So this is an email or a piece of post sent to the wrong receiver.
Human error, you mean?
Yes, so it's just a human error and not that much tech actually involved. That's also the reason why in these data breaches, usually there's only one data subject involved. Following this conclusion, this is also being recognized by the supervisory authorities worldwide. They gathered in Tirana at the end of last year, and one of the resolutions that they adopted is also to address the role of human error in personal data breaches, because that's a very big one. Okay, so now that we've been looking at some data, let's continue with the rest. Annemarie, we've been mentioning the word data breach for quite a few times by now. Can you please elaborate a bit more on it and make sure that we're all on the same page again? What is a data breach?
What is a data breach? Well, in this slide you can see the definition from the GDPR, but let me start with giving you some background information. One of the requirements of the GDPR is that by using appropriate technical and organizational measures, personal data are processed in a way that ensures the appropriate security of the personal data. Think of protection against unauthorized processing, against accidental loss, etc. But also in a way that establishes immediately whether a breach has taken place. So a key element of any data security policy is being able to, well, where possible, of course, to prevent a breach, and where it still occurs, to react to it in a timely manner. What should be clear is that the breach is a type of security incident, but then it's a special kind of security incident because the GDPR is, as we know, all about the processing of personal data. So a data breach is a security incident in which personal data have been compromised. And this highlights the difference between a security incident and a personal data breach. All personal data breaches are security incidents, but not all security incidents are necessarily personal data breaches. The consequence of a data breach is that an organization can no longer ensure compliance with the principles relating to the processing of personal data, as you can find them in Article 5 of the GDPR. I mean, principles of lawfulness, purpose limitation, transparency, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, etc.
Okay, well, you mentioned appropriate security measures. When is a security measure appropriate? How can that be decided?
Yeah, that's a tough question. The GDPR does not define the security measures that you must implement, but well, it only requires you to have a level of security that is appropriate to the risks associated with your processing activity. So you will need to consider this to assess this yourself, and you must do so in relation to the state of the art, cost of implementation, the nature, the scope, the context, the purpose of the processing. So what's appropriate, sorry to say, it depends on the circumstances. And this way of formulating is not making things easy, but still, well, it is important as it makes clear that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And well, at the same time, security does not have to be absolutely perfect. It depends on the circumstances. So this is also in line with the risk-based approach of the GDPR. And this approach results in open standards, giving ample room for flexibility in respect of your information security program, for instance. On the other hand, it may lead to a lot of uncertainty. There is guidance available that will help you to determine what measures are considered to be appropriate under what circumstances. Guidelines from the European supervisory authorities in the first place, but also there are frameworks that already existed, well, at least some of them, before the introduction of the GDPR. And they can be helpful as well. Think of, for instance, the COVID framework. I think most of the ICK listeners will be familiar with this one. But also the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the National Institute of Standards and Technology developed frameworks. And speaking of the NIST, earlier this month they published their dedicated privacy framework. Well, then of course there is a framework from the European Agency for Cybersecurity. And for the Dutch participants, the NORIA, the Professional Organization for IT Auditors in the Netherlands, has published its own framework. And then, of course, let's not forget the ISO 27001 standard.
No, especially that standard is very widely used, isn't it? Yes,
yes. And there is actually a lot of common ground between this ISO standard and the GDPR. They have different backgrounds, but they both focus on reducing risks to people, to organizations, risks caused by misuse of data, personal data. But they do so in different ways, of course, because they have a different background. The ISO standard focuses on reducing risks by forcing organizations to use information security management systems to keep these updated. The GDPR, on the other hand, focuses more on reducing risks by providing individuals certain rights, like the right to access, the right to correct, the right to delete, and by imposing data protection obligations on organizations, by holding organizations accountable. Actually, there's a considerable overlap in principles and requirements.
Yeah, when we're talking about ISO standards, there is a specific ISO standard for privacy, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct. In August last year, the ISO published a standard for privacy information management, ISO 27701. Actually, this standard explains how to extend the existing standard ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 on information security management systems and security controls. So you can manage privacy as well as information security. But I will not discuss this standard because, well, it was only recently introduced. Not many organizations have adopted it yet. And as you said, many organizations have adopted ISO 27001.
Okay, so then back to the data breaches. You said before that a data breach is a certain type of a security incident. But even within the different kind of data breaches, you can separate different kinds. Can you explain a bit more?
Yes, yes. I would say it's even useful to differentiate between different kinds of data breaches, because this will help you recognizing a data breach and mitigating data breaches. Usually data breaches are categorized according to the 3 information security principles of CIA. So we distinguish distinguish confidentiality breaches, integrity breaches, and availability breaches. And then, of course, a breach can concern confidentiality, integrity, and availability at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, here again, we see common ground between the ISO standard and the GDPR, because both frameworks focus on loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data and related risks. I think ISO 27001 certified organizations are well equipped to demonstrate compliance with, in particular, Article 32 of the GDPR on security requirements.
Okay, is it possible to give us some examples of the 3 different types of breaches?
Well, I'm looking at the clock. Let me
Already, yes.
Yeah. So I think confidentiality breach, that will be clear to all participants of this webinar. An integrity breach, well, let me give you an example. When, for instance, information in a patient's medical file has been changed, well, then the patient may receive no treatment or the wrong medication. That's an example of integrity breach. An availability breach, well, let me give you the example of, well, last week there was a ransomware attack, and a university in the Netherlands, the University of Maastricht, was the victim. And that attack made personal data unavailable.
Yes, and they ended up paying the hackers, didn't they?
Well, yeah, they paid the ransom because the backup files were also unavailable due to the attack. Yeah. Well, this is clearly an example of an availability breach.
Yeah.
I would like to mention here briefly one last element that's important for understanding the concept of data breach, and that is the impact an incident may have on the rights and freedoms of individuals. This is also a smooth transition to the next topic on our agenda, to report or not to report data breach. Data breaches are all about risks, and it's the impact of a personal data breach on the rights and freedoms of people that determines whether or not the incident must be reported to the supervisory authorities and the persons involved. Let me say here that the scope of this risk concept is broad. Actually, it refers to all rights and freedoms as mentioned in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. And it covers any significant economic or social disadvantage to a person. Well, here you see some examples on the slide. What's interesting here is when you look at the last bullet point, the mere loss of control over your personal data is considered to be a risk. Recently, there have been a few court decisions, also in the Netherlands, about damages being awarded for loss of control over personal data, even without the need to demonstrate financial loss, for instance. And this highlights another possible financial consequence of a data breach, other than a penalty, I mean, compensation awarded to persons affected by the breach.
Yes, well, to me that sounds like a whole other topic, Annemarie, and maybe something for a next webinar to discuss.
Right, you are right.
Okay, then let's continue with our next point on the agenda, and that is whether or not a notify is mandatory, to notify or not to notify.
Yes. Well, I would like to refer here again first to the common ground between the ISO standards and the GDPR, because both frameworks require the reporting of security incidents immediately or without undue delay. Well, when it comes to determining the need for a notification, Articles 33 and 34 of the GDPR distinguish 3 scenarios. The first scenario is where a breach is unlikely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. In this case, no notification is needed, and well, you should only register the incident, the data breach, in your organization's internal register, data breach register. Then the second scenario is where a breach is likely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. In this case, well, notification to the supervisory authority is necessary. The third scenario is where a breach is not just likely to result in a risk, but in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And in this case, well, you will also need to notify the persons involved.
even in the case of high risk, there are some exceptions to that rule, aren't there?
Yes, there are 3 exceptions. This is where the personal data that have been compromised are unintelligible, for instance, because of the use of effective encryption. Second exception is where the high risk is unlikely to materialize because of subsequent measures. For instance, when files on a stolen mobile device are immediately wiped remotely. And the third exception is where communication to the persons involved would require disproportionate efforts. The EDPB gives an example. This would, for instance, be the case when a fire destroys the archives of a hospital and all documents containing personal data are lost. In this case, a public statement can be more effective. It's not always easy to determine whether a specific data breach should be notified or not. And well, it's my experience that many organizations are struggling with how to determine if to notify or not. I would like to say here that whatever decision you make sure it is well documented. And this is important in respect of your, well, what we already said, your bookkeeping obligation, your accountability obligation. And even if you've taken the wrong decision by not notifying, for instance, it will help if you can demonstrate why you took this decision. And not being able to explain the why can be heavily sanctioned. I would like to give you some examples here, but again, due to time constraints, well, let me tell you that you can find many examples of all 3 scenarios in the guidelines on personal data breach notification of the Article 29 Working Party, which were adopted by the EDPB.
Okay, well then let's continue. You said you have reporting to the supervisory authorities, reporting to the data subject. And what if you concluded that a data breach does not trigger a notification to be sent to either of those parties involved? You said you still need to document the incident in an internal data breach register. Why is that?
Yes, you are right. Well, this will help create privacy awareness in your organization. It will help your organization to learn from previous breaches and prevent similar breaches. And last but not least, the supervisory authority may ask to see those records. So they are important to help your organization to demonstrate, again, accountability.
That's a topic that keeps coming back in this discussion, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay, well, imagine that you do need to report according to the criteria you just showed. And what if you don't do it?
Well, of course, I think no organization likes to admit that they've had a breach. I would say it's better to be safe than sorry. When you conceal a breach, well, it may cause greater reputational damage when the breach is discovered in a later stage. And, well, this happens, for instance, because an individual has filed a complaint with supervisory authority about his or her personal data being compromised. Let's not forget that the individual is in the driver's seat these days, and they have a right to file a complaint with supervisory authority, and supervisory authority must give follow-up to these complaints.
Yeah. Can there be a sanction for not notifying?
Yes. The authorities have, well, they have a wide range of corrective measures at their disposal, including imposing an appropriate penalty, an administrative penalty. And the value of this penalty can be up to 10 million euros or 2% of the total worldwide annual turnover of the preceding financial year. And also, well, bear in mind that sometimes the failure to notify is the result of inadequate security measures, as I already indicated. Security measures should indicate measures to detect incidents in a timely manner. And in that case, the supervisory authority may impose a fine for not notifying the incident, but also for not having the appropriate security measures in place for detecting the incident. And so you can have accumulation of fines.
Yes. Okay, then let's continue to the next question that we receive a lot. What to do when an incident occurs? What are the steps to take? Well, as a matter of joke, I usually say, then you are too late. If that is the moment that you start worrying about what to do, in all fairness, a lot of companies have obviously thought about it, but maybe it's good, Annemarie, if you just go quickly through what these type of preparations for a data breach can look like.
Well, on this slide you can see some recommendations. What you say is true. You should avoid making bad decisions under time pressure. And we do know that notification of data breaches is time sensitive. So a data breach procedure requires close collaboration of the various disciplines in your organization. Think of your IT security specialists. They are necessary to assess the impact of an incident, give follow-up on that. We will need assistance of privacy specialists to help find out whether personal data are involved and which steps should be taken. Again, we see here the common ground between the ISO standard and the GDPR, because both frameworks focus on the cooperation in your organization between the different, the various professionals, disciplines. I think that usually a data breach procedure is embedded in a security incidents procedure. Then you should also determine which supervisory authority is your lead supervisory authority. Because when a data breach is affecting people in multiple member states, then you will need to inform your lead supervisory authority. And well, I think we all know that Brexit Day is fast approaching. If you're doing business in the European Union and the ICO is your lead supervisory authority, do not forget to nominate a new European lead supervisory authority. You have 1 day to do that.
Yes. Very last minute advice.
When you would be wise to make sure that people, it would be wise to introduce a internal notification point, so people know where to mention that they have encountered a possible data breach. Often the customer contact center is used, but well, it can also be another department. Then if an incident is serious enough, it can be escalated to a data breach response team. With in this team you will have data protection officer, for instance, privacy officers, the CISO, the security officers, the head of the customer contact center, communication specialists, relevant process owner. Well, make sure that they all have their own role description. And this team should also have the authority to make the necessary decisions when a data breach occurs. Make sure there are replacement procedures in place if any of the team members is not available. Well, and finally, set up awareness sessions for quick recognizing of data breaches by your staff that's handling personal data. And well, simulate a data breach every now and then, so all people involved can practice.
That's what we should do as well.
Yes.
Nice. Sounds like a fun trial. Okay, well, so that's for the preparation. Then the steps that you have to do when a breach actually occurs.
Yes. First of all, damage control. Determine the measures you can take immediately to limit the damage. And well, often this will only be possible once you have started the investigation, which is step 2. But when it is obvious what measures should be taken to immediately reduce some of the risks, do it right away.
Yeah, I heard somebody giving an example once of in case of a breach involving credit card data, that the organization immediately notified the issuing organization. So to block all the affected cards, not to make matters worse, or if a PC is infected in a network, that machine is being taken out as soon as it's visible or no.
Yeah, well, then the second step, as I already said, investigation of the incident, analyze the incident, make sure you know what has happened, establish the scope of the incident, what type of breach was it, a confidentiality breach, an integrity breach, availability breach, what systems were involved, what stakeholders are involved, what kind of data subjects are involved. You will need all this information to assess the need for notification to the supervisory authority, which is the third step. And well, the organization must do so within 72 hours after having become aware of the breach. If this notification is not made within 72 hours, well, you will need to explain why you didn't do so.
Yeah, but that's something I hear a lot as well. That it's not always very clear as to when the clock starts ticking. So when does this 72-hour frame start?
Yeah, I see what you mean. An organization is considered to be aware. Sorry, I'm a bit legalistic, but when it has a reasonable degree of certainty that a security incident has taken place and that personal data have been compromised. Mm-hmm. But let me remind you here again that the GDPR requires organizations to detect immediately if a breach has taken place. Mm-hmm. That's a security measure. Okay. As far as the process is concerned, it's the controller who is responsible for notifying the data breach. Mm-hmm.
So, if it's not a processor, then who knows?
Well, it's my experience that every now and then it's the processor who does so, but a processor can only make a notification on behalf of the controller. If this processor has been instructed by the controller to do so. So there should be an arrangement, a contractual arrangement, mm-hmm. a data processing agreement, where between controller and processor, including this obligation for the processor. And as far as the content of the report is concerned, mm-hmm. well, let me not list the mandatory elements. You can find them in Article 30 GDPR. But be aware that each supervisory authority provides its own means for notifying, and often a web form or a downloadable form is provided. And these forms often have more questions than the article they are included in Article 33. Yeah. We will come to that later.
Okay.
Well, then you may have to communicate the data breach to the persons affected by the incident, and the GDPR does not provide an explicit time limit for doing so. It says that you must do so without undue delay, meaning key here is that you help persons to understand the nature of the breach and the measures they can take to protect themselves. There are, for instance, data breaches where the individuals should immediately take action to reduce the risks.
Yeah, like for, I've heard it before as well, when login and password information of a certain website, for example, has been leaked, it's very wise for users to change their password, because many internet users still at this moment use the same login and passwords for different websites. So then they should immediately change that on all these different websites.
Yeah, that's correct. What I would also like to say here is that it's important that the data breach communication is expressed in clear and plain language. Yeah. It should be a dedicated message. So it should not be combined with regular newsletters, for instance. Yeah. Use transparent means of communications like text messaging, email, postal communication, and even consider using several methods of communication so as to maximize the chance of properly communicating information to all persons. On your website.
Yeah. Okay, well then at the last on the list, and that is the internal data breach registration, the obligation of the controller to maintain an internet data breach register with an overview of all the personal data breaches, the facts, the effects, and the action taken. Later in this presentation, we'll share some tips with you relating to the register.
Yes, well, one last thing I would like to say, you may want to communicate data breach also to other parties that you can find in the GDPR. For instance, your supervisory board or the shareholders, or an insurance company in case you have a cybersecurity policy, your employees, for instance, your branch organization, the press, You should think about that as well.
Okay. Well, now, Annemarie, let me present you with challenges that companies ran into. That the first one that is if data in organizations, it's still a data breach.
Personal data are being shared with colleagues was heavy.
Yeah.
This means that personal data are shared on a nice basis. And this working is in most cases not the should share with this for which these data are being processed and providing access to employees of an organization where there is no need to make well is a data breach.
Okay. The second one,
yes, may affect people states. Well, when this happens, well, I briefly mentioned it already, then your organization must notify the lead supervisory authority. This is not always the authority of the member state where the individuals involved are located or where the breach has taken place. I would like to mention here also the advice from cybersecurity expert Locke Morel, who is a member of the Dutch Cybersecurity Council and ICT professor at Tilburg University. If an international organization, and now I'm talking about worldwide, if such organization has to notify a data breach to multiple supervisory authorities worldwide, make sure to do so at the same time, because there is no supervisory authority that will accept being informed at a later stage than another supervisory authority.
Okay, and that can be quite challenging, I think, because there is quite a difference in how of the reporting different supervisory authority system there.
Yes, the practical ways of reporting differ significantly between member states. Only the requirement to notify within 72 hours applies everywhere. Well, supervisory authorities provide different reporting options, like the digital reporting form, which is a swift way of communicating, but not all supervisory authorities provide such digital reporting form. There are also downloadable reporting forms. Some supervisory authorities want to be informed by email. You can even call the supervisory authority or visit the supervisory authority, or ordinary as well. So there are various means. Also, it's good to know that the reporting language is not always English. Some supervisory authorities have made an English version of their reporting form, but the majority of authorities only exclusively allow for reporting in the local language. And then, of course, the number of questions on the reporting forms. Well, this number varies considerably, from 8 questions to over 70 questions, which makes filling out the form more or less time-consuming. I think we should skip the other challenges because we are time.
Okay, well, they are in the slides. let's continue.
In the case, if you want to have more 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we can do some less questions, but I think it's important that you finish your presentation.
Okay, then we'll take the last two challenges as well. Thank you, Roberto. The fourth one is you have joint controllers. Who is then responsible?
Well, yes, when two or more controllers jointly determine the how and the why of your processing activity, then they are joint controllers, and they must determine their respective responsibilities in respect of all their joint processing activities. So they will also need to determine which of the two controllers will have responsibility for complying with the notification obligations under Article 33 and 34. The Article 29 Working Party, the EDPB, has recommended that the contractual arrangements between joint controllers include provisions that determine which controller will be responsible for what obligation. And if there is no such arrangement between joint controllers, then they will be jointly and severally responsible in respect of the data breach.
You have mentioned the 72-hour time line quite some times now. So we know there's a strict time limit for reporting data breaches, but there are some circumstances, I think, where a delay is allowed, isn't there?
Yes, but that should really be the exception. Well, let me first list some reasons that are not valid for delaying notification. For instance, holiday of one of the employees, illness of one of the employees, workload in your company. It is weekend, sorry. The DO was not timely informed. These are all not valid reasons for delayed notification. The EPP gives one example. This is when your organization suffers multiple similar data breaches and you want to notify these in a single detailed report. That's the only example they give, as far as I know. And well, when you are confronted with a complicated breach and you need more time to collect information, you can still file a first notification within 72 hours, and then you can give follow-up notifications as soon as you have more information available. And of course, it's always possible to withdraw a notification if further investigation shows that the incident does not qualify as a reportable data breach.
No. Okay, good. So those were the challenges. Then we have listed some tips that were created by the Dutch Supervisory Authority based on a research they did in 2019. They have looked into different data registers, data breach registers of 26 governmental organizations. And based on what they saw, they have deducted a list of 10 or created a list of 10 tips for you to have a look at. They are not maybe the most difficult tips, but they are important to follow when creating a data breach register. It's about being clear. It's about giving insight into different type of measures that you're taking, who you should involve, and how you can show your accountability. Again, these will be sent to you in the slides, so you can read them afterwards as well. It's all about being transparent, and documenting is a very important topic here.
Oh, the accountability principle.
Again, Annemarie.
Yes. Noortje, now let me ask you a question.
Yes,
you've been with PrivacyPerfect for quite some time now. It's a software, privacy software company. What can you tell us about the marriage of data breaches and automation? Is it a happy marriage?
Yes. Yes. I also believe in happy marriages. No, it's. I think it's important to make a distinction first, because there's different type of automation as software to help you prevent breaches as well. That's more a bit the security aspect. Think about firewalls, security software, mail encryption, programs, even automating the process. What I want to talk about in the sense of automation is that parallel to this, there's also a need for your is a process which has a lot of repetitive and time-consuming actions. And keeping a data breach register is actually just one small part of that. You need to keep your processing register, and you need to execute DPIAs. So those are processes where a lot of different departments and a lot of time is going on. And actually, every aspect, I think, in business life involves multiple people and has a recurring character. You can gain time and efficiency by automating, of course, where possible. And I think that, to be honest, in privacy, is an area where there's still a lot of to gain, possibility to become better. A lot of people, from my experience, companies, they start by keeping privacy administration in open text software. And as the maturity of privacy awareness grows in the company, also the question or the demand for automation grows, because people start to notice it takes a lot of time and they need to communicate. So here, of course, the list can be longer, but I've listed some main advantages that I see when we're talking about data governance or privacy governance and automation. The first one is to save time when it matters. For example, in the case of a data breach, you have said that time is of the essence. Also with the process of the data subject access request, timing is also an important aspect of that. And if you have a good privacy administration, it can help you in getting insight into the scope of your data breach or your data subject access request as quickly as possible. For example, think about your Article 30 register. If you have filled it out correctly with the proper links and you have a certain breach in a specific application, you immediately know which departments are involved, which data subjects you might have to warn, what technical and organizational measures you have in place. It's very quick to identify links and gives you a head start in, let's say, the following up of the breach. Another item that I would like to say is use the insight that automation gives you for prevention. Because by using software, it's usually easier what to do with most identify risks. You also have your to decide and the reuse of information. A good example of building legal knowledge, for example, the criteria whether or not to do. As you know, because you have been a privacy list, a lot of work to do. You should do it only when it's necessary or can help with that, and especially if you're it might be quite tough to decide on your own to DPI.
Yes, each jurisdiction has its own.
Exactly. And when you can have those incorporated in software, it helps you to make these decisions. The same is for obligations in your register. it's good that software warns you when you have not completed a certain process. For example, if you have not added a purpose to a specific processing, which is a mandatory field under GDPR. And then the reuse of information, that can be done in many different ways. Throughout your privacy administration, there are multiple modes. You have to enter the same information or almost the same information. If you have a process and you want to assess whether or not you're doing it in the right way, you can use that process description of your Article 30 as input to your assessment. And of course, also the other way around. And the same goes for your data breach. If you have a data breach in a specific process or application, you can set information in your data breach ready with data. Then I want to mention, and this is a bit more the generic software advantage, is for example, see who changed what in the system, when and where. A versus B versus C, and not every the same true at the same time. So that's something that software prevents. The same with software very easy who can see what. And again, this is very much going to nice to know basis. And the last one actually is not on the slide, which is an important one, is that the reports are easy to create from software because of all the cross-references that are available in the database. That was actually what I wanted to say about automation. We are also on a webinar. Just want to give you 3 key takeaways, which we think are very important. The first is to work smart, so be prepared and know what you want to occurs. Report where possible. So thank you for your if you want to contact us, you can do that. You can add us on LinkedIn or email. We are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your presentation. Both Annemarie and I don't remember, sorry.
Noortje, it's okay.
Because it's a bit complicated for me. But, okay, thank you very much, both of you. We have received 2 questions. At least the one that I saw. The first one is one that came from Amedeo. He says, how can we calculate the risk if we have not carried out a previous DPIA? If we don't have to have a DPIA any case other than the Article 35, we cannot calculate the risk. Therefore, we don't know if our measures were adequate. Any thoughts?
Did you hear the
I
question?
didn't fully understand the question.
So how can we decide the risk, if it's high risk or not, if he didn't carry out a DPIA? The short summary of the question.
Okay, well, I would really recommend to do a DPIA if you are starting a new process. It would go beyond the scope of this webinar to explain in detail when a full DPIA a pre-scan is required. But this is only at the moment processing activity. Does this breach? We are talking about a breach occurring in an existing processing activity.
Okay. I don't know if Amadeo has things that he covered in his question, but okay, we can pass to the other one.
Yes, and
Jose Salvador asked if you consider formal certification in the 2017 standard compliance as a sufficient legal proof that you were establishing the technical measures to protect personal data maintained by the GDPR?
Sorry. Maybe Roberto, you can repeat it one more time because it's quite a long question to follow.
Yeah, well,
yeah?
I think it should be two questions, but okay. Do you consider formal certifications in the 2071 standards compliance as a sufficient legal proof that you were establishing the technical measures to okay. By the way, because first, the certification in 2071 is preparing any person to be able to perform an audit or an implementation in the GDPR.
So is the 2010 ISO certification preparing someone enough to do an audit under the GDPR?
Sorry, you are talking about the ISO 27001 standard? Yes, and well, if this standard is requiring organizations to...
If you have the certification.
Well, what he's asking is if
No, if you mean if you are ISO 27001 certified, if that will do to demonstrate compliance, your accountability. Yeah. No, that will not do. But then you are on track. But of course, ISO 27001 is not detailed enough to ensure to give assurance about your GDPR compliance.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, one of the chapters of the ISO 27 is exactly like that. No, it's check if you are compliant or not with the legal aspects. Okay. Well, I didn't see any other question. Amedeo said that the question was answered perfectly. So only one, the last one, I will is because we have 1 minute at least in my clock. What happens after a data breach notifications have been sent to the supervisory authority?
Well, what happens next? Well, it will. Yeah. Well, this will depend. It's up to the supervisory authority. From the Dutch supervisory authority, we know that they review all received notifications. Always inform you about the fact that they have reviewed the notification. If it turns out that you have complied with your notification obligation and that you have taken appropriate measures, then, well, there will just be no reaction. But, well, every now and then the authority needs answers to more questions, so they will contact you. And then, depending on the circumstances, they will give you a call, or they will send you a letter with additional explanation of the law, for instance, because they think you didn't understand it, the GDPR. They can oblige you to inform the persons involved in the data breach in case you didn't do that. And they can start, well, investigations, brief investigation in case your notification was late, an in-depth investigation if they think that you did not take the appropriate security measures. And well, then they close the notification when turns out that you complied with all they asked in the correct way and that sufficient measures have been taken. But it will, of course, be dependent on the supervisory authority. They do it all in their own way.
Okay. Okay, perfect. For your presentation. Also, thanks to all to this webinar. I hope to see all of you in this one. One point that I want to clarify, because we are performing change in our website. So one of the changes is affecting to our website or to the part of our website that to deliver the CPEs. But I guess that it will be available during the next days. So we will send you the link to this video session and the link to the test to obtain the CPEs. Also for you, some of the people was asking to receive the slides. So if you can provide me, I will upload to our website and share the link also for your slides. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Well,
thank you very much again. And nice to see you. And maybe we can talk about the next webinar that you were talking during the presentation.
That's good. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.